At my son's doctor appointment, the receptionist casually told me his last name had been changed behind my back. That single line on a computer screen dragged me into a custody war, a forged signature, and a DNA test that blew my ex's entire family legacy apart. I was standing in line at the pediatrician's office, rocking my 4-year-old son on my hip, when everything I thought I knew about my own family snapped in half over a single piece of paper. "Insurance card and ID, please," the receptionist said without looking up. I slid my wallet across the counter with one hand and shifted Noah higher on my shoulder. He was drowsy from the fever, his hot cheek pressed against my neck, his little fingers tangled in my shirt. The printer hummed. The receptionist tapped at her keyboard. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere down the hall, a baby cried. Then she frowned. "Sir," she said, eyes finally lifting to mine. "Is there a mistake on your ID?" My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She turned the monitor slightly toward me and pointed at the intake form on her screen. Noah Bennett. Last time we'd been there, his name had been Noah Carter, my name. "I'm sorry, what?" I blinked, leaning in as if my brain just wasn't catching up. "That's not right. His last name is Carter. It's always been Carter." She double-checked the spelling, clicked through a few tabs, then shook her head. "We just updated his file with the legal records from the county system last week," she said, a little more carefully now, like she was stepping around something breakable. "It's showing here. Name change approved 2 months ago. Father, Ethan Carter. Mother, Rebecca Bennett. Child's legal name, Noah Bennett." For a second, I genuinely couldn't feel my legs. I heard the printer, the crying baby, somebody coughing behind me in line, but it all seemed to come from far away. My fingers closed around the edge of the counter until my knuckles went white. "Can I see that?" My voice sounded wrong. Too calm, not mine. She turned the screen back and pulled up the scanned court order. There it was, in grainy black and white, my son's first and middle name, and then, in bold type where my surname was supposed to be, the Bennetts, my in-law's name. My vision tunneled for a second. Noah shifted, mumbling, and I forced my arms to tighten around him so I wouldn't drop him. "Sir, if you need to step aside for a moment, I can call the next patient," the receptionist said gently. I swallowed hard. My tongue felt like sandpaper. "No," I said. "It's fine. Just keep the appointment under Carter for now. I'll sort this out." It was a lie. I had no idea how to sort any of it out. All I knew was that somehow, without my consent, without even a phone call, someone had reached right into the most basic part of my identity as a father and quietly cut me out. On the drive home, Noah slept heavily in his car seat, his mouth slightly open, breath whistling. I kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, as if he might have physically changed too, as if losing my last name might show up on his face. It didn't, of course. He was still mine. Dark curls he got from me, soft hazel eyes he got from his mother. But my heart hammered with a rhythm I didn't recognize. One part fear, one part fury. "My name is Ethan Carter. I'm 36, an IT project manager who used to think I had a complicated but basically functional life. I grew up in a modest, stubbornly middle-class family. Carter was never a powerful name, not like Bennett. It didn't open doors or make people nod approvingly at country clubs. It came with busted knuckles, long commutes, and bills paid on time. The Bennetts were the opposite of that. When I first met Rebecca in grad school, I thought her last name was just another detail. We met over stale coffee and algorithms. She wore oversized hoodies, not designer labels. She never talked about money. It wasn't until we'd been dating for months that I met her parents and understood exactly what I was walking into. Her mother, Elaine, met me at the door of their stone front colonial with a smile that showed every one of her veneers. "Ethan," she said, saying my name like she was testing a food she wasn't sure she liked. "So lovely to finally meet you." Her father, Richard, shook my hand with a firm, practiced grip, his wrist weighed down by a gold watch that probably cost more than my car. We had dinner at a table big enough for 12, even though it was just the 4 of us. The china clinked. The conversation was polite, breezy, filled with questions that weren't really questions. "And what do your parents do?" Richard asked. "Still in, what was it, plumbing?" "Dad runs a small plumbing business, yeah," I said. "Mom's a nurse." "Honest work," he said with a tight smile, as if he were complimenting a particularly earnest dog. At the time, I brushed it off. People have their biases. I loved Rebecca. She loved me. We were going to build our own life. Her parents would either get over themselves or not. Either way, we'd be okay. When we got engaged a year later, the Bennetts insisted on covering the wedding. "It's tradition," Elaine said. "We want to do this for our only daughter." The wedding was beautiful and exhausting. A string quartet, a ballroom, 7 different kinds of canapes. I stood at the altar in a rented tux, watching Rebecca walk toward me through a haze of soft lighting and flowers, and thought, this is it. This is worth whatever comes with it. At the reception, Richard made a toast that has haunted me ever since. "To my daughter," he said, raising his crystal glass, "and to the man she's chosen. Ethan, welcome to the Bennett family. And remember," he smiled, the crowd chuckled, "the name Bennett has always been synonymous with excellence. I'm sure you'll do your best to live up to it." People laughed. I laughed. But somewhere deep inside, something prickled, like a warning I didn't quite understand. When Rebecca fell pregnant 3 years later, the Bennetts sprang into action like they were planning a merger, not a grandchild. "We'll handle the nursery," Elaine declared, sweeping through our modest townhouse with an appraising eye. "We'll get you properly set up. And of course, we'll want the baby at our country house for the summers. Bennett's always spends summers there." I kept telling myself their over-involvement was just excitement. Annoying, sure, but harmless. Then the surname argument started. We were in the hospital room, still raw from the labor. Rebecca was sweaty, exhausted, cradling this tiny, wrinkled creature to her chest. I sat on the edge of the bed, running a shaky finger over his impossibly small hand. "He looks like a Noah," she whispered. "Noah Carter," I said, tasting the combination like something sacred. Her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Or Noah Bennett Carter," she said. "Hyphenated, so both names are there." I glanced at her. "We talked about this," I said gently. "Hyphenated names are complicated. I thought we agreed he'd have my last name, but of course he'd be raised knowing he's a Bennett too." "It's not just about knowing," she said, her voice sharpening. "It's legal. It's legacy. Your parents don't get to decide our kid's name," I said more sharply than I meant to. Her eyes flashed. "They're his grandparents. And I'm his father," I said. "My name goes on the birth certificate." We didn't yell. We were too tired and overwhelmed for that. But the air between us chilled. When the nurse came in with the paperwork, Rebecca signed Rebecca Bennett Carter with her neat, loopy signature, and I signed Ethan Carter in my messy scrawl. In the box for the baby's name, we wrote Noah James Carter. Later, I would come to see that moment as the line in the sand. A quiet one, but a line all the same. In the first months of Noah's life, the Bennetts hovered like satellites. They showed up with expensive strollers, organic cotton onesies, a high-end crib we didn't need. "You shouldn't be taking him to that pediatric clinic," Elaine would say, lips pursed. "Our family doctor is much better. He's taken care of Bennetts for years." "Our family doctor is great," I would reply, forcing a smile. "We're happy with him." She always said our family, like I wasn't truly part of it. Still, I told myself to pick my battles. If they wanted to buy him overpriced toys, fine. If they wanted photos of him in little polo shirts and boat shoes, fine. It was annoying, but I could live with it. What I couldn't live with, I was starting to realize, was the subtle way they tried to erase me from the picture. At their house, they hung portraits of Noah in the foyer under a brass plaque that read, "The Bennett Line." They introduced him to their friends as our grandson, Noah Bennett, like it was a foregone conclusion. The first time I heard it at some charity event they dragged us to, I corrected them with a laugh. "Carter," I said lightly. "Noah Carter." Elaine slipped her arm through mine and squeezed just a little too tight. "Oh, Ethan," she cooed. "Names are just details. The important thing is he knows where he comes from." Later, I'd find out they were telling him exactly that in ways I never imagined. By the time Noah turned 3, my marriage was already showing cracks that had nothing to do with my in-laws. Late nights at the office on both sides, fights about who did more around the house, unspoken resentments forming like plaque between our words. Rebecca was drifting away from me, and I didn't know how to pull her back. We agreed, on paper at least, that Noah's surname was non-negotiable. We argued about schools, bedtime routines, screen time, but not the name. That part I thought was settled. So standing in that pediatrician's office 3 years later, staring at the words, name change approved, felt like discovering your house had been quietly robbed, not of your television or your jewelry, but of the foundation. That night, after Noah was tucked into bed, his curls still damp from the bath, I sat at the kitchen table with a copy of the court order I'd pulled up from the county records site. There were signatures at the bottom. One was Rebecca's. The other was supposed to be mine. "Ethan?" Rebecca's voice came from the doorway. I looked up. She stood there in leggings and an oversized sweater, holding a mug of tea, her hair in a messy bun. She looked tired, soft, familiar. I slid the printed document across the table. "You want to explain this?" I asked. She glanced at it. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Guilt, panic, I'm not sure. Then it smoothed out. "It's not what you think," she said. "It looks like a court order changing our son's last name without my consent," I said, my voice low and shaking. "And it looks like someone forged my signature." She pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. "Mom and Dad talked to a lawyer," she began. "They said it would be easier for school, for inheritance, for them," I snapped. "Easier for them." "You're overreacting," she said, her tone flattening. "It's just a name, Ethan. You're still his father." "No," I said. "No, apparently I'm not. Not enough to be told that you were going to legally erase me from his identity." "We didn't erase you," she insisted. "We just adjusted. He's still Noah. You're making this into some kind of attack." "It is an attack," I said, feeling my heartbeat in my throat. "On me, on our marriage, on any shred of trust I had left." The argument that followed is a blur of raised voices, slammed doors, Noah waking up crying, me holding him in the dim light of his nightlight, while Rebecca paced the hall. In the days that followed, something broke that couldn't be fixed. We went to counseling. We tried to talk it through, but every session spiraled back to the same place. "You never respected my family," she would say. "They never respected me as his father," I would shoot back. And always, hovering in the background, the knowledge that she had chosen them over me in the most literal way possible. The divorce papers arrived 3 months later. I wasn't surprised. "We can do this amicably," Rebecca said, standing in the doorway with her arms folded across her chest. 50-50 custody. No drama. Noah doesn't need to see us tear each other apart. I stared at her, at the woman who had once promised to love me for better or worse, and felt a cold clarity settle over me. "I'm not agreeing to joint custody if his legal name stays Bennett," I said. "My son will have my name, or we're taking this in front of a judge." Her jaw tightened. "Then I guess we're going to court," she said. Our first hearing was in a small family courtroom downtown. The chairs were hard, the lights were harsh, everything smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Rebecca sat on one side with her attorney, a graying man in an expensive suit. Her parents sat right behind her, Elaine's hand clamped on her daughter's shoulder like she was steering a ship. Richard's mouth was a thin, satisfied line. I sat on the other side with my own attorney, a woman named Dana who spoke with a calm, measured tone that made me trust her immediately. Noah wasn't there. He was with a sitter. The judge had deemed him too young to be dragged into the proceedings. For that, at least, I was grateful. The judge, a woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and sharp, assessing eyes, read through the file quietly for a long moment. "So," she said finally, looking up, "we have a dissolution of marriage, disputed custody, and a contested name change that appears to have been processed without the father's consent." Her gaze flicked to Rebecca, then to me. My attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client was not informed of the petition to change his son's last name. His signature on the filing is a forgery. We'll be requesting the change be vacated and the original surname restored." Rebecca's attorney rose smoothly. "Your Honor, my client acted in good faith based on legal advice," he said. "She was told she could proceed with the name change in the best interests of the child, given the substantial difference in socioeconomic stability between the two families." My hands curled into fists under the table. The judge held up a hand. "I've read the submissions," she said. "We're not going to relitigate them verbally right now." She leaned back, studying us for a long beat. I felt the weight of her gaze like a physical pressure. "I'm going to order some standard evaluations," she said. "Home visits, parenting assessments, financial disclosures, But given the nature of what's been alleged here, the forgery, the questions about paternity being implied in some of these filings, I glanced sharply at Dana. Paternity? We hadn't, the judge continued, matter of fact. I'm also ordering DNA testing for the minor child and both listed parents, she said, to be completed within 30 days. Once we have those results, we'll reconvene and address custody and the name issue with all the facts on the table. The room seemed to tilt. Rebecca's head whipped toward her attorney. Elaine's perfectly lined mouth fell open for once. Richard shifted in his seat. I sat there, feeling my heart slam against my ribs. DNA test. I had never doubted Noah was mine, not for a second. He was the only thing in my life that had ever felt unquestionable. So why, as the judge's words echoed through the sterile courtroom, did a shard of icy dread twist its way into my spine? I looked over at Rebecca. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, she wouldn't meet my eyes. Outside the courtroom, the hallway felt colder than it had on the way in. People shuffled past in suits and heels, murmuring into phones, rustling papers. A fluorescent light flickered overhead, buzzing just loud enough to grate on my nerves. Dana touched my elbow. "Hey," she said quietly. "Breathe." I realized I'd been standing there, frozen, staring at the closed courtroom door like it might open again, and the judge would say she'd changed her mind. DNA testing is standard in messy custody cases like this, Dana went on, especially when the other side is implicitly questioning your fitness as a father. This doesn't have to be a bad thing, Ethan. It can clear the air. Paternity? I said, my voice harsher than I intended. Where did that even come from? I never claimed Noah wasn't mine. Dana's eyes flicked briefly toward the end of the hall, where Rebecca stood with her parents, their heads bent together in a tight, anxious cluster. Richard's jaw was set. Elaine's mouth was a thin, furious line. They snuck it into a supplemental filing last week, Dana said. I told you they were playing dirty. They never flat out said you weren't his father, but they insinuated you were, emotionally distant, that you might not be bonded, that your attachment could be complicated. Judges hear that and they start thinking in terms of objective proof. Bonded, I repeated. The word tasted like rust. I've been there every night he had a fever, every time he had a nightmare. I know, she cut in gently, and a DNA test will show beyond any legal doubt that he's yours. That will shut down any narrative they're trying to build about you being some peripheral figure. Peripheral. That was exactly what Elaine wanted me to be, a footnote in Noah's life. I glanced down the hall again just in time to catch her looking up. For a second our eyes met, and I saw it clearly. Fear, calculation, and beneath it all, a kind of brittle arrogance that said, "This is our world. You're an intruder." Rebecca wouldn't look at me. She adjusted the strap of her handbag, nodded at something her father said, and then the three of them swept toward the elevator like a single organism. Dana followed my gaze. They're going to get nastier before this is over, she said. You need to decide now what you're willing to fight for. I didn't have to think about it. For my son's name, I said, for my time with him, for him to grow up knowing who actually stood by him. Dana nodded once. Good, then we lean into this. We cooperate fully with every order. We don't give them an inch to paint you as obstructive, and we let the facts do what they're going to do. What if the facts... I stopped, the rest of the sentence catching in my throat. What if the facts say he isn't mine? The thought had never had space to live in my head before. Now, invited in by a judge's neutral tone, it scuttled into every corner. I remembered the months before Noah was born, the project in San Francisco that had kept me away for 2 weeks, the way Rebecca had seemed distant when I got back, more impatient, more brittle, the text messages she'd locked her phone to hide, the late nights she'd blamed on campaign work for some client of her marketing firm. I'd written it all off as stress, as the growing pains of two ambitious people trying to balance careers and a baby. I'd never once added those fragments up into a question about paternity. Ethan, Dana said, her voice softening, if there's anything I need to know before we proceed, now is the time. I swallowed. I never cheated, I said. I don't have any reason to think she did. We had rough patches, but I've always believed Noah was mine. If this test says otherwise, I stared at the scuffed linoleum. He's still my son. I don't care what a piece of paper says. Dana's gaze gentled just for a second. I hear you, she said, but legally the paper matters. You prepared for that? I wasn't. Not really. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something like clarity. If it comes back and I'm not the biological father, I said, each word feeling like it weighed 100 pounds, I still raise him. I still fight for him. And I still want Bennetts as far out of his paperwork as possible. He doesn't need their name to be worth something. Dana studied my face, then nodded. Okay, she said. Then we deal with whatever comes, one step at a time. A week later, I sat in a sterile lab waiting room with Noah on my lap, watching cartoons on the muted TV mounted in the corner. The room smelled like antiseptic and cheap coffee. The vinyl chairs squeaked every time someone shifted. Rebecca sat opposite us, scrolling on her phone. Elaine perched next to her, a scarf draped elegantly over her shoulders despite the humming air conditioner. Richard sat stiffly beside them, arms folded, eyes straight ahead like he refused to acknowledge even the wallpaper. Noah swung his legs, his sneakers bumping against my shins. "Daddy," he said, pointing at the cartoon, "why is the dog purple?" "Creative license, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Sometimes artists make things look silly on purpose." He giggled, then went right back to staring at the screen. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted to Rebecca. She looked tired, shadows under her eyes, lips pressed too tight. But there was something else there, too, a guardedness, a wall that hadn't been there once upon a time. The nurse called my name first. "Ethan Carter?" I stood, shifting Noah to my hip. "We're both coming," I said. "In this round, we're just doing your sample," she explained apologetically. "We'll take his and Mom's after, one at a time." I kissed Noah's forehead. "Be right back, champ," I murmured. He clung to my collar for a second, then let go, sliding down to stand between the 2 rows of chairs. Rebecca didn't reach for him. I followed the nurse down a narrow hallway to a small room that looked like every other blood draw space I'd ever been in. Metal tray, latex gloves, a faded poster explaining DNA with cheerful cartoons of chromosomes. "Just a cheek swab today," she said, snapping on gloves. "Open wide." I did. The swab scraped the inside of my cheek, quick and painless. She labeled the vial with a barcode and a long string of numbers. "Done," she said. "You can send Mom in next. Then we'll bring the little guy in for his. He'll get a sticker." I almost laughed. Like a sticker could possibly balance the scales of what we were doing here. On the way back to the waiting room, my mind kept replaying the Bennetts' faces when the judge had said the words DNA testing. There had been more than shock there. Something like alarm. Like people who had spent a long time making sure certain questions never got asked. I pushed the door open. Noah looked up immediately, face brightening. "Daddy!" He ran over, grabbing my leg. "Your turn soon, superhero," I said, smoothing his curls. "Mommy's going first." I met Rebecca's eyes. "They're ready for you," I said. She stood, smoothing her dress automatically. Elaine reached out, catching her wrist. "Are you sure this is necessary?" Elaine asked, pitching her voice low, but not low enough that I couldn't hear. "We should talk to your lawyer again. There must be a way around this intrusion." "The judge ordered it, Mom," Rebecca said, the strain bleeding into her tone. "We don't have a choice." "There is always a choice," Elaine hissed. "We should have never let it get this far. If you had just stayed firm on full custody." "Go," Richard said sharply. It was the first word he'd uttered in an hour. "We'll deal with the fallout later." The fallout. The way he said it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Rebecca disappeared into the hallway. I sat down with Noah, who had climbed back into my lap, already absorbed in the cartoon again. My hand rested on his back, feeling the rise and fall of his small lungs. "What if," a cruel little voice in my head whispered, "this really does show you're not his?" I shut my eyes for a second, fighting the wave of nausea. If that happened, I thought, then I was going to learn something I never asked to know. Something I couldn't unknow. But it wouldn't change the nights in the rocking chair, the scraped knees I'd bandaged, the way he said "daddy" like it meant home. I opened my eyes to find Elaine watching me. "What?" I said, more defensively than I'd meant to. She adjusted her scarf, eyes cool. "If this test proves what we all suspect," she said softly, "perhaps you'll see reason and step back gracefully, for Noah's sake." My jaw clenched. "And what is it you suspect exactly?" I asked. "Go ahead, say it out loud." She held my gaze without blinking. That you were never meant to be central in this story, she said. Some chapters, Ethan, end sooner than others. I laughed, the sound brittle even to my own ears. I'm his father, I said. That's not a chapter, that's the binding. She opened her mouth to reply, but just then the nurse called, Noah Carter? I stood, lifting him into my arms. It's Bennett, Elaine said sharply, half rising from her chair. The nurse hesitated, looking between us. I took a breath, keeping my voice level. The court is currently considering the name dispute, I said. For the purposes of this test, you can note both surnames if you have to. But I answered when you called, didn't I? She nodded, clearly wanting no part of whatever this was. Right this way, she said. It won't take long. In the swab room, Noah looked around curiously. Is this like the doctor? He asked. Kind of, I said. They're just going to tickle your cheek with a little cotton Q-tip. Then you get a sticker. Think you can be brave? He nodded solemnly. The nurse swabbed the inside of his mouth while he giggled, squirming just enough to make it a challenge. When it was over, she handed him a sheet of stickers. He chose one with a cartoon lion and stuck it crookedly on his shirt. Roar, he said, baring his teeth. Roar, I echoed, my chest tightening around a feeling I couldn't name. Rebecca waited in the hallway, eyes red-rimmed. She looked from Noah to me, then quickly away. We're done, I said. Good, she murmured. I'll talk to you through the lawyers. She reached for Noah, and he automatically leaned toward her. I pressed a kiss into his hair. Bye, buddy, I said. I'll see you Sunday, okay? We'll go to the park. Park, he said, already distracted, his lion sticker wiggling as he bounced. I watched them walk away. Elaine's hand settled on Noah's shoulder, claiming. Richard's shadow fell across all of them. I told myself to remember this feeling. The combination of helplessness and determination. One way or another, the next time we all sat in front of that judge, things were going to look different. The 30 days before the next hearing stretched and blurred. One part ordinary life, one part slow-motion dissection. A social worker from Family Services came to my apartment for the home assessment. Ms. Alvarez was in her 40s, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense bun. She walked through my small two-bedroom place, taking notes on a clipboard, while Noah built a tower of blocks in the living room. It's not as big as their house, I said, more defensively than I meant to. But he has his own room. I adjusted my work hours so I can do daycare pickup. I've been the one taking him to most of his doctor appointments. Ms. Alvarez nodded, jotting something down. Size doesn't matter as much as safety and emotional stability, she said. How does Noah act when he's here? I glanced at my son. He'd just knocked his block tower over and was laughing, already rebuilding. He's happy, I said quietly. He sleeps through the night. He doesn't cling when he has to go back, but he always asks when he'll see me again. She gave me a small, genuine smile. That's important. A week later, she did a home visit at the Bennetts estate. I wasn't there, but she described it at our next meeting. They have resources, she said diplomatically. Big house, staff, private school brochures on the table. But I also noticed something. She hesitated. What? I pressed. Every photo in the main hallway was curated, she said. Professional portraits, matching outfits, their daughter's achievements framed. Noah's too, but always in the context of the Bennett name. There were no candid snapshots, no drawings on the fridge. It doesn't mean anything definitive, but it adds context. I exhaled slowly. Context, I repeated. That's one word for it. Rebecca submitted her financial disclosures, polished and neat, with a note about how I'd failed to maintain the standard of living Noah was accustomed to after moving out. I submitted mine, less impressive on paper but honest. Pay stubs, rent receipts, bank statements showing the automatic transfers to the joint account I'd kept funding even after I left. When the DNA lab finally called Dana to say the results were in, I felt my stomach drop to somewhere near my shoes. They'll be sent directly to the court. She told me over the phone. We'll see them when the judge does at the hearing. No advance peek? I tried to joke and failed. Sorry, she said. But Ethan, no matter what, we argue from what we know. You've been his father in every way that matters. Remember that. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the crack in the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fridge in the next room, the occasional car passing outside. My mind ran in loops. Noah's first steps on my outstretched palms, his first word, truck, not mama or dada, which had secretly crushed me, the way his face lit up when I picked him up from daycare. If some lab report tried to tell me that wasn't real, I decided that was the report's problem, not mine. But beneath the defiance, the fear still gnawed. What if the test didn't just reveal something about Noah and me? What if it cracked something open on their side? The way the Bennetts had reacted, the way Elaine had whispered about fallout, played on repeat in my head. I had a feeling we were all about to find out what she'd meant. The courthouse felt different the second time. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the knowledge that somewhere in that building, in a sealed envelope, was a set of numbers that could redraw the map of my life. Dana and I sat at the same table as before. Rebecca sat across, flanked by her attorney and her parents. She wore a navy dress this time, more conservative, as if she were trying to project seriousness and stability. Elaine's posture was ramrod straight. Richard's eyes were flinty. The judge entered, her robe sweeping behind her. We rose, then sat when she did. "Good afternoon," she said. "We're here to continue the matter of Carter versus Carter Bennett regarding dissolution, custody, and the minor child's surname." She shuffled a stack of papers, then lifted a thin, sealed envelope. "Before we proceed with argument," she said, "I want to place on the record that the court has received the ordered DNA analysis pertaining to the child and the two listed parents." My heart climbed into my throat. She slit the top of the envelope with a letter opener, slid the report out, and began to read silently. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the faint whisper of paper. I watched her face. Judges are trained not to show much, but I'd learned to read micro-expressions in tense meetings and negotiations. A slight tightening around the eyes, a purse of the lips. Something flickered there now. Surprise. Then something like concern. She cleared her throat. "On the matter of paternity," she said, eyes flicking briefly to me, "the test indicates a 99.999% probability that Mr. Ethan Carter is the biological father of the child, Noah James." Relief hit me like a physical blow. My vision blurred for a second. I exhaled a breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. Dana's hand brushed my arm under the table, grounding me. Across the room, Elaine's shoulders tightened. Richard's jaw clenched. Rebecca swallowed hard. "But," the judge continued, her tone shifting ever so slightly, "there are additional findings in this report that raise serious questions about certain assertions made by the maternal side regarding bloodline, inheritance, and the basis for the contested name change." She looked up, her gaze landing squarely on the Bennetts. "The court, on its own motion, ordered follow-up testing of the maternal grandparents," she said. "Those results have now been incorporated into this report." Dana's head snapped up. "Your Honor, with respect," she began, but the judge held up a hand. "Counsel, I'll explain," she said. "Given the emphasis the maternal family has placed on their surname, lineage, and Bennett legacy in their filings, the court felt it necessary to establish the biological relationships being implied." She glanced back at the paper, then read, enunciating each word. "The analysis shows that while Ms. Rebecca Bennett Carter is indeed the biological mother of the child, she does not share a biological parental relationship with Mr. Richard Bennett. Furthermore, the probability of her being the biological child of Mrs. Elaine Bennett is, statistically, negligible." You could have heard a pin drop. Rebecca's attorney sputtered. "Your Honor, that can't be right. There must be." Elaine went white to the lips. Richard's hand shot out, gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles blanched. Rebecca stared at the judge, frozen, her mouth slightly open. I sat there, heart hammering, as the floor beneath the Bennett's carefully constructed world began, visibly to crack. For a long moment, no one said anything. It was like the air had been punched out of the room. The judge's words hung there, heavy and impossible, while the Bennett's faces went through rapid, jagged shifts. Shock, denial, something like naked terror. Elaine was the first to move. "That's absurd," she burst out, half rising from her chair. Her voice, usually controlled and honeyed, came out ragged. "There must have been a mix-up at the lab. I've raised Rebecca since the day she was born." "Sit down, Elaine," Richard hissed through clenched teeth, not taking his eyes off the judge. The judge's gaze didn't waver. "Mrs. Bennett," she said calmly, though there was steel underneath, The samples were taken under direct court supervision. Chain of custody is intact. The lab has certified the results. I have no reason to doubt their accuracy. Rebecca's attorney cleared his throat, clearly scrambling. Your Honor, he said, with all due respect, whatever irregularities may exist in Ms. Bennett Carter's parentage are not material to the issues before the court. My client's relationship to the minor child is not in question. They have acted as his grandparents. Exactly, the judge cut in. They have emphasized at every turn their bloodline, their legacy, and the Bennett name as though it conveys some inherent superiority or entitlement. They initiated a name change for this child based on that premise, and now we learn that premise is, at best, deeply compromised. She turned slightly and met my eyes for a second. I felt something I didn't expect there, solidarity, like she had been just as offended by their arrogance as I had. I'm going to call a brief recess, she said. This is clearly an emotional revelation for everyone in this room. When we reconvene, we will address the custody arrangement, the invalid name change, and appropriate sanctions for fraud upon the court. She banged the gavel lightly. 15 minutes. In the hallway, chaos. I stepped out into a wave of whispers and the buzzing of phones as attorneys ducked into corners, already calling colleagues, clerks, whoever you call when the ground opens up beneath your case. Dana exhaled sharply beside me, running a hand through her hair. Well, she said, that was unexpected. Did you know? I asked. My voice sounded hoarse in my own ears. She shook her head. I knew the judge was irritated by their filings. I did not know she'd ordered additional testing. Judges don't usually do that on their own. She must have really wanted to cut through the smoke. I leaned against the cool cinder block wall, trying to make sense of what we'd just heard. So much of the Bennett's contempt for me had been rooted in that name. In their money, sure, in their country club circle, in their sense of superiority, but always couched in the Bennett legacy. And now, in one page of lab results, that legacy had been yanked out from under them. I glanced down the hall. Rebecca stood with her back against the opposite wall, arms folded tightly across her chest, as if trying to physically hold herself together. Her attorney was hissing something in her ear. She didn't seem to hear him. Elaine just stood there, eyes glassy, breathing fast. Richard had moved a few steps away, one hand on the windowsill, his shoulders rigid. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, wanted to crow that this is what they got for trying to slice me out of my own son's life. But looking at Rebecca, something in me softened. Whatever else she'd done to me, she had just found out in front of a judge, 2 attorneys, and a room full of strangers that her entire life story might be a lie. She looked up suddenly, like she could feel me watching her. Our eyes met. For the first time since the day she handed me the divorce papers, her expression wasn't hard or defensive. It was lost. I pushed off the wall and took a few steps toward her before I'd really decided to. Rebecca, I said quietly. Her attorney immediately moved between us like a reflex. Now is not the time, he said. It's fine, Mark, she murmured, surprising him. Give us a minute, please. He frowned, but stepped aside. Up close, I could see how badly her hands were shaking. I didn't know, she said before I could speak. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Ethan, I swear to God I didn't know. I believed her. You thought they were your parents, I said. They are my parents, she said automatically, then faltered. I mean, they raised me. They... Her throat worked. What does this even mean? I don't know, I admitted, but I know what it doesn't mean. She blinked, tears brimming. It doesn't mean you're less Noah's mother, I said, and it sure as hell doesn't mean they have any right to use you as a pawn to control him. Her jaw clenched at that, like the words had hit something raw. I let them, she said, voice breaking. I let them talk me into the name change. I wanted Noah to have what I never really did, I guess, a place in their world. And now, she shut her eyes, pressing her palms against them. I thought I knew who I was, she whispered. I swallowed. For a brief, strange moment, we weren't ex-spouses across enemy tables. We were just 2 people standing in the smoking crater of the Bennett's lies. You can figure that out, I said. You should. But right now, we have a kid who needs stability, and a judge who just saw your parents for who they are. Use that. Don't let them drag you down with them. She dropped her hands, looking at me like she was really seeing me for the first time in months. You still want him to have your name, she said. Yes, I said simply. I always have. She nodded slowly. Then fight for it, she said. For him. Not to hurt me, just for him. We stared at each other for a second longer. Then the bailiff's voice echoed down the hall, calling us back in. When we reconvened, the temperature in the courtroom had dropped 10 degrees. The judge looked like she had used those 15 minutes to go from privately shocked to professionally furious. All right, she said, settling back into her seat. Given the revelations in the DNA report, we need to address several issues before we can finalize custody and the name question. She turned her attention squarely to the Bennetts. First, she said, this court does not look kindly upon individuals who manipulate legal processes based on misrepresentations. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, you both signed affidavits emphasizing the importance of your bloodline and explicitly connecting that to your push for the minor child to bear your surname. You framed your request as preserving a biological family legacy that, we now know, does not exist in the way you claimed. Elaine opened her mouth, but the judge cut her off with a look. I understand this is a personal shock, the judge said, her tone not unkind, but unyielding. If you wish to pursue whatever family law avenues are available to you regarding Ms. Bennett Carter's parentage, that is your business. It is not this court's. What is my business is the best interest of Noah James and the integrity of this court's orders. She shuffled another paper. Second, she went on, there is the matter of the forged signature on the name change petition. I have before me a report from a handwriting expert retained by the court. That expert has concluded, with a high degree of certainty, that the purported signature of Mr. Ethan Carter on the name change request is not genuine. My breath caught. We'd suspected as much. Seeing it confirmed in black and white was something else. The judge's gaze flicked to Rebecca this time. Ms. Bennett Carter, she said, would you like to explain how that signature came to be placed on a legal document you filed? Rebecca swallowed, color draining from her face. I didn't sign for him, she said, voice shaking. I swear I signed my part, and then my parents. My mom said she'd get Ethan's consent, that they'd handle it with their attorney. I never saw that paper again. Elaine let out a small, strangled sound. Richard put a hand on her arm, his fingers digging in. That is a very convenient story, the judge said coolly. Convenient or not, it is the only explanation on the record, and it places you all in a very precarious position. She stacked the documents neatly. Here is what we are going to do, she said. The name change is vacated, immediately. The child's legal name is restored to Noah James Carter. Any institutions that have updated their records based on the previous order will be notified by this court of the correction. Elaine's lips parted in silent outrage. Richard's nostrils flared. Regarding custody, the judge continued, I have reviewed the home studies, financial disclosures, and testimony. Mr. Carter has demonstrated consistent involvement in his son's life, emotional stability, and a willingness to cooperate with court orders. Ms. Bennett Carter, you have as well, though your judgment in allowing your parents to unduly influence legal decisions about your child is concerning. Rebecca stared at the table, cheeks burning. The Bennetts, the judge said, her voice sharpening, have demonstrated a willingness to defraud the court and to place their own egos above the child's identity and stability. That will weigh heavily on any future determinations about their access. She folded her hands. Accordingly, I am granting Mr. Carter primary physical custody, she said. Ms. Bennett Carter will have substantial parenting time on a set schedule. Holidays will be alternated. Legal custody will be joint, but with final decision-making authority regarding education and medical issues vested in Mr. Carter, should the parties reach an impasse. My heart stuttered. Primary custody. Not every other weekend. Not we'll see. Real, anchored time. As for the Bennetts, the judge said, her gaze turning icy, I am not ordering any formal grandparent visitation at this time. They may see the child during Miss Bennett Carter's parenting time at her discretion, but I caution you, Miss Bennett Carter, if they continue to undermine the child's relationship with his father or engage in further legal manipulation, I will revisit this issue and restrict their access further. Elaine let out a small, shocked gasp. You can't, she began. I can, the judge said firmly, and I will if necessary. The law does not exist to prop up anyone's pride. It exists to protect the vulnerable. In this case, that means a 4-year-old boy who did not ask to be the battleground for 3 adults and 2 very entitled grandparents. Silence. I realized my hands were shaking under the table. Dana reached over, giving my fingers a quick, grounding squeeze. "We will reconvene in 90 days for a compliance review," the judge concluded. "Until then, I expect all parties to abide by this order. No unilateral decisions, no more forged anything. Is that understood?" I mumbled, "Yes, Your Honor," in sync with Rebecca, our voices overlapping for the first time in months. The Bennetts said nothing. The judge stared them down until Richard gave a stiff, reluctant nod. "Good," she said. "We're adjourned." The gavel fell. The sound echoed like a starting gun. The first night Noah slept at my apartment under the new order. He ran from room to room like he'd never seen the place before, even though he'd been there 100 times. "Is this my room now?" he asked, peeking into the small bedroom I'd painted pale blue one frantic weekend after the hearing. Dinosaur decals marched along one wall, slightly crooked. His stuffed animals sat in a messy pile on the bed. "It's always been your room," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "But now you get to sleep here more." He climbed onto the bed, bouncing experimentally. "Can I bring my lion?" he asked. "Your lion lives here now too," I said. "Anywhere you go, lion goes." He grinned, seemingly satisfied with the logistics of custody. As I watched him configure his toys, my phone buzzed with a text. "Unknown number. This is my new phone. Please save it if you want. Rebecca." A moment later, another came through. "Rebecca. He told me he wants to spend Thanksgiving at your place this year. If that's okay with you." I stared at the screen for a long second, then typed back, fingers moving more easily than I expected. "Me. Thanksgiving is perfect. We can work out the details later, one step at a time." There was a long pause. Then, "Thank you. And I'm sorry. For all of it. I'm still figuring out where I end and they begin." I looked at Noah, now putting his lion in pride of place on his pillow, giving it a serious pat on the head. "Me. Start by telling him the truth, about his name, about who's been there for him. The rest we can untangle as we go." 3 little dots pulsed, then disappeared. No reply came. It was okay. I hadn't really expected one. "Daddy," Noah called, "can we read the truck book?" "Always," I said, stepping into the room. We lay on the bed, him tucked under my arm, the well-worn pages of his favorite picture book rustling between us. His hair tickled my chin. His weight against my side felt like an anchor. Halfway through the story, he poked the cover. "Why does it say Carter?" he asked. He just started recognizing letters, sounding out words slowly, proudly. "Because that's your name," I said. My voice caught a little, but I pushed through. "Noah James Carter, same as mine." He frowned thoughtfully. "What about Bennett?" he said. "Nana says I'm a Bennett." My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to keep my tone even. "You're lots of things," I said. "You're my son, your mommy's son, you're their grandson. Names are just how we write that on paper. But you and me, we've got Carter, because I'm your dad." He considered that, then nodded like it made perfect sense. "Okay," he said. "Can we get ice cream on Friday, Daddy Carter?" I laughed, a wet sound that surprised me. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "We can definitely get ice cream." In the months that followed, the Bennetts tried, in smaller ways, to reassert control. They sent expensive gifts to my address, addressed to Noah Bennett, which I returned unopened with a copy of the court order tucked inside. They made snide comments during exchanges, about my modest apartment, about the public preschool I'd chosen instead of the elite academy they preferred. Once, when I dropped Noah off, I overheard Elaine telling him, "Don't worry, darling. You'll understand when you're older that some people aren't meant for our world." He caught my eye over her shoulder and frowned, as if he knew, even at 4, that something about that was off. I didn't engage. I kept meticulous records, and I told Dana. At the 90-day compliance review, the judge asked each of us how things were going. I spoke honestly about the small provocations. Ms. Alvarez's follow-up report backed me up, noting that Noah seemed relaxed and secure with both parents, but that he showed signs of confusion when adults around him used different names for him. The child told me, unprompted, "Sometimes I'm Bennett there and Carter here," Ms. Alvarez wrote. He then asked, "Which one is true?" The judge's lips thinned reading that. I'm going to be very clear, she said, looking directly at the Bennetts. This is not a game. You are not characters in some social drama. You are adults influencing a child's sense of self. If I hear of any further attempts to undermine the legal name or status of this child, I will not hesitate to issue a no-contact order. That, finally, seemed to get through. The next time I saw Elaine, the sharpness in her gaze was still there, but something else had joined it: caution. She bit back a remark about ice cream trucks and junk food neighborhoods halfway through, catching herself. Sometimes that victory felt petty. Other times it felt like the only thing standing between my son and a lifetime of being used as a prop in someone else's story. As for Rebecca, she started going to therapy. I know because one day, months later, we sat on a park bench while Noah climbed the jungle gym, and she told me. Her voice was quieter now, less performative. I found some papers, she said, staring at her hands, in a box in their attic. Adoption forms, dated 6 months after I was born. My original birth certificate had a different last name, different parents. She laughed once, without humor. They'd gone to such lengths to pretend it never happened that they forgot the body keeps records too, she said. Blood doesn't lie. I didn't say they lied. I figured she knew that. What are you going to do? I asked. I confronted them, she said. They blamed each other. Then they blamed me. Then they cried about how I was ungrateful for the life they gave me. My therapist says that tracks. She rubbed her eyes. I spent my whole life trying to be the perfect Bennett daughter, she said. And I never could have been, because I never was. You're still Noah's mom, I said. That's a bloodline that actually matters. She nodded, swallowing. I'm working on being just that, she said. Not their puppet, not their legacy, just his mother. We sat in silence for a while, watching Noah race another kid to the top of the slide. Thank you, she said suddenly, for fighting, for not rolling over when we tried to erase you. I thought about the pediatrician's office, the receptionist's confused face, the sting of seeing Noah Bennett on that screen, the judge's gavel, the DNA results, the way my last name now sat solid and real on the little library card in Noah's backpack. I didn't do it to win, I said. I did it so one day when he asks me why his name is what it is, I can tell him I didn't give up on being his dad. She smiled faintly. That's a good story to tell him, she said. Sometimes late at night, when the apartment is quiet and Noah is asleep in his room, I take out the court papers, the copy of the vacated name change order, the custody agreement, the DNA report with its string of cold clinical percentages. They're just paper, ink on fibers, but they represent something that once felt unthinkable, that in a world where people with more money, more connections, and more arrogance tried to write me out of my own life, the system, for once, sided with the truth. The truth that biology mattered, yes, but not in the way the Bennetts thought. It wasn't a weapon to wield against those they looked down on. It wasn't a golden ticket to entitlement. It was just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The truth that fraud and manipulation, no matter how carefully dressed up, tend to unravel when someone pulls hard enough. The truth that names matter, not because of the family crest embossed on the letterhead or the way it sounds at a gala, but because of who shows up when the fever spikes at 2 a.m., who learns the stuffed animals' names, who sits in hard chairs in courtrooms and refuses to walk away. Noah sometimes asks me, now that he's 5 and more curious about everything, why my last name is on his homework folder. Because we're a team, I tell him, you and me. He smiles, like that makes perfect sense. He still spends time with his mom. Sometimes he sees the Bennetts too at her house. I can't shield him from all of their influence. I wouldn't want to. They did, despite everything, put food on her table for years. People are rarely just one thing. But now, when he comes back, he doesn't say, Nana says I'm really a Bennett. He says, Nana talks a lot about her house, with the same tone he uses to talk about cartoon characters, like it's a story he can believe or not. And when he curls up against me on the sofa, his head on my chest, his little hand fisted in my shirt, and murmurs, Daddy Carter, can we watch trucks? I feel something settle inside me. Not triumph, just rightness. They tried to steal my name from him, and in the process they lost their own, at least in the way they wanted it to be seen. The judge's DNA order didn't just validate me as his father. It stripped their lies down to the bone. In the end, the thing they valued most, that fancy surname, turned out to be the least real part of them. And the thing they tried the hardest to erase, that I am Noah's father by blood and by choice, is the one thing they can never touch again.